Following armed terrorist invasion by the TPLF against Ethiopia and its government, some international entities have been issuing various reports on the country. But to what extent are they credible, and does some of their reporting even hold water? Well, my guest today is Francesca Ronchin, a journalist from Italian media covering local and global issues. And this is our weekly ADDIS Dialogue with Itam Shifaralako to stay with us. All right, Francesca, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, I know you've been following new developments unfolding in Ethiopia and are trying to reveal the realities on the ground. The latest accusation coming up now is, as you know, including the National Defense Force in the looting TPLF committed. In your view, why are they resorting to such erroneous allegations and, in effect, defame the ENDF, the National Defense Force, which is properly institutionalized and led by Code of Ethics?
Yeah, well, yes, I can start saying that, first of all, as you have noticed, that I focus a lot on the war propaganda that in the last months has been going on surrounding the Tigray crisis, the crisis in Ethiopia, and I think that this is the really a big issue. And of course, now about what you are mentioning, as for the fact that many are accusing the National Defense Force in the recent lootings, I see it as a continuous attempt to delegitimize the Ethiopian administration. As I said, I think nobody could ever say that the National Defense Force is perfect or that they cannot commit mistakes. But in this case, the testimonies about the responsibilities of the TPLF seem overwhelming. Even the USAID mission director, Sean John, talked about lootings committed by the TPLF. And it is also one of the very first times where they refer to the TPLF rather than using other creative expressions in order not to pronounce that word. So, I mean, the testimonies about the responsibilities of TPLF seem overwhelming. But as I said, the process of the legitimation that has been going on in the last month doesn't change overnight.
All right. Also, the international community, Francesca, is still calling on both sides indiscriminately to come to the negotiation table. How can a government negotiate with elements branded as terrorists, and this while they continue to ravage and destroy civilians in broad daylight?
Well, I think that also this is part of the propaganda that they keep going on, because this rhetoric seems aimed at confusing the public opinion and again empowering one side against the other. This confusion, I think, has been going on since the beginning because, for instance, Tigray is a region, right? It's about, sometimes they talk about it as it was a sovereign state, which is not. And again, an ethnic secessionist war led by the TPLF against the multi-ethnic federal government has been narrated as if it was a defensive war against the ethnic cleansing operation committed by the government. So the role of victim and oppressor have constantly switched.
In one of your articles on Ethiopia, you say accusations on the Ethiopian government and its Eritrean counterpart is baseless, as they are not substantiated by credible evidences. Explain that to me.
So I don't know if you are referring to the one about Axum massacre, but I think so, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
In that story, okay. In that story, I've pointed out that many of the accusations made by Amnesty and the Human Rights Watch at that time were full of contradictions, and that the evidence that they brought was weak. The testimonies also were collected by phone or remotely, like in Sudan refugees camps where many Samri, TPLF fighters have found hospitality. So actually were not impartial voices. How did Amnesty verify if among the people they interview there was any conflict of interest? We don't know that. They don't say it. So there were many things that actually, in my opinion, was not very precise or not collected in a very reliable way. In fact, while they talked about a massacre of almost 1,000 unarmed civilians next to the Cathedral of St. Mary of Zion, what has later come out, thanks to the investigation, which was still underway, but conducted by the Attorney General of Ethiopia, is a completely different scenario. Apparently, there was a reprisal in consequence of an attack against an Eritrean contingent, but the civilians who were killed were few, not the numbers that Amnesty talked about, were not normal civilians, but residents who had been armed by TPLF after 2 days of training. So it was a completely different scenario. I mean, it's a war. A war is full of terrible things, but the massacre. But I think that in front of such terrible events, it's better to be more cautious and maybe to take in consideration both sides of the story, and maybe waiting to wait more time before launching some heavy accusations.
Okay. You also say NGOs seem to give voice only to the accusations that suit the cause of the rebels, with a double standard that reflects that of the American administration. And the government has suspended some of the NGOs in Ethiopia. What is your take on that?
Okay. Of course, we don't have to generalize. There are many NGOs that are doing, I think, an important job. NGOs plays an important role, and are not all the same. I know that many NGOs are very committed in the humanitarian work they do, and this is precisely the reason why, as a journalist, or as a citizen of the world, I got surprised by seeing that a matter an issue so delicate and important, like the fact that children were fighting along with the TPLF soldiers, didn't capture the attention that other issues did, right? So in a way, I arrive by analyzing their work. In fact, as I said before, I find incredible that no one single tweet or post in their social platform has been dedicated to this issue. I think really this is also very sad, because NGOs should do an important job, right? I mean, humanitarian issues, bringing humanitarian aid, or caring about the humanitarian aspect are something very important. And I think that using this double standard can really weaken the trust that people have regarding these NGOs, and also weakens their credibility. And this is something really sad. And so, like Amnesty, also I asked the same question to other humanitarian agencies. I didn't report that in my stories because it was focusing more on the Amnesty report, but I also asked the UNHCR about why they didn't cover this issue, and they all say, well, we don't have enough elements. Still, as I said before, many other issues that have not been so crystal clear took a lot of attention and discussion from NGOs or from humanitarian organizations. So again, it's a double standard, which is sad. But again, which is the reason behind it? Because I wonder why it's so that these NGOs, at least from what it seems, why is that they play this double standard, right? And I can imagine that, of course, there is a big, strong network of connections, relationship that while the TPLF was at the government during the 27 year of this when it was at power, they developed a great network also internationally of relationship, and some of these relationships are still as active nowadays. And it's possible, of course, that many of the people that who work in Africa for these NGOs have solid ties with the TPLF, and end up influencing the whole organization's work agenda. In this case, the process could be considered like a bottom-up, but it might also be top-down, like meaning that these organizations, these NGOs, follow the interest of somebody else, like the United States or the so-called international community, right? It's not a mystery that the United States has considered Ethiopia as a close ally in order to pursue their strategic business in the Horn of Africa. So that also can play a role. And then again, there's also something that I've seen at play with Eritrea for many years. Eritrea has been considered the enemy with a capital E, right? Has been the target of sanctions for 9 years, even if there were no evidences about. Even the Security Council of United Nations admitted that they didn't have any evidence. So the propaganda building process is very similar then with Eritrea and now with Ethiopia. And some of the players are the same.
Wherever the TPLF goes, it seems that it is leaving a trail of destruction. The reactions from the international community, however, seems to favor this and even goes as far as blaming the government of Ethiopia of using such parlances as using hunger as weapons or as instruments of war and the likes. What do you make out of that?
Okay, well, I'd like to answer by talking about what happens in Italy. Italy is the first country in Europe where migrants from Africa arrive, and has always been very connected to the Horn of Africa situation. In Italy, for years, the main narration of the majority of the media has been the one put forward by many activists who claim to belong to the so-called Eritrean opposition. These activists who have worked for years and still do with Eritrean refugees in Tigray, from Tigray, have developed strong connections with Italian media and politics. And many of these people are the same who now support the narrative of TPLF. And with them, there is a wide network of NGOs, humanitarian organizations. So I'm not surprised that in the media, that's the media, especially in Italy, but not just in Italy, keep following their narrative. What is surprising in both cases, then with Eritrea and now with the Tigray crisis, is that the majority of the media and also of the politics give a voice just to the, they keep for granted to what few people say and ignore what the Ethiopian community have to say. What is the voice of the Ethiopian people in the media? I didn't see the voice of the Ethiopian community. What you see, what you read about is just the voice of so-called expert of Africa who live in the United States or in the north of Europe that has to say, of course, to give his respectable analysis. But what has been missing is the voice of the Ethiopians. Maybe the voice can also, I'm not assuming that there is just one voice of the whole Ethiopian community, but still now in this conflict, just one side of the conflict had a lot of space and attention, especially in the media. Since the beginning of the conflict, if a journalist took time to speak to some Ethiopians, even maybe on the web or looking for them through the social platform, could easily notice that there was a huge gap between what the TPLF basically was saying about the crisis and what they had to say. So, I mean, this part was really completely missing, and it looked like no media, no journalist had the minimum interest to actually discover what the Ethiopians had to say. And the ironical part is that also in Italy, but not just in Italy, many media kept talking about the so-called silence on Tigray, the silence on genocides committed by the government, when in fact those who accused the prime minister of such crimes were the only one who were talking. So, I mean, it's all basically upside down in a way.
And finally, Francesca, what is your message to the government and fellow Ethiopians to counter erroneous narratives, including misinformation and disinformation going against Ethiopia?
Well, I think that in the last month, I've noticed a progressive increase in terms of awareness about how important it is to communicate and not to stay silent in front of some injustice, or at least not just treatment. And I think that it's good that there is this improvement in communication and using the social platforms, using English so everybody can understand. And also whenever there are some facts and news that are not clear, to give the maximum possible of information, and sometimes also being the first to communicate, not to wait that something happens and some reactions against Ethiopia maybe happens, and then to answer back and to react. Sometimes it's better also to be the first to cover an important issue or to cover some news, some facts, and give what what are the documents or what is the take of the government, to be of course more transparent as possible, even if of course this is just maybe one side. The sides of the same fact can be many, but it's important to be outspoken and more transparent as possible. Since we live in a world where communication now is so powerful and important, sometimes it's really useful to be as clear as possible, and sometimes to prevent the actions of or the propaganda that can come from outside.
Indeed. Francesca, thank you so much for your time, and also thank you for helping Ethiopia convey its truth to the world.
Thank you for your attention, and thank you for your time.
All right, well, dear viewers, with that we come to the end of this program. Many thanks for your company so far. Until I see you next time with another program, it's goodbye from me, Shifa Rawlak.